As we go. Good morning again, Thursday, April 17th, 2025. House Transportation, continuing DMV Education 101, and Lieutenant Jeremy Desjardins is joining us to take us through enforcement and safety at the DMV. We appreciate you joining this morning. We'll have you come and introduce yourself for the record and take us through your presentation. You were here for our introductions earlier.
You don't need to go. I'll go to my next slide. So good morning, I'm Lieutenant Jeremy Desjardins. A little bit of my background in law enforcement. I've been well over a decade with enforcement and safety at the DMV. Served in many roles. I know earlier, maybe a week or so ago, we had somebody from the criminal investigation unit do a presentation for you. That's the primary area that I work for. Started as a detective investigating the fraud, then became the supervisor for the Southern Investigation Unit, which it used to be broken in North and South. And then just as of July of 2024, through reorganization, this Business Services Unit that I'm going to talk to you about today was created, where I was appointed as the section chief and navigated to sort of bring in enforcement and safety and the operations part of the DMV together to support at first our dealerships with maybe some expansion down the road. Some other background, certified as an auto theft investigator. There aren't too many of us in the state that do stolen vehicle stuff, task forces like they have in New York and other states. I teach at the teach motor vehicle law and VIN verification at the Vermont Police Academy. Again, the dry subjects that have to keep people awake for 8 hours talking about motor vehicle law. I'm also a member of the National Vehicle Title Information System, NVIDIS, which we went to around 2016, 2017 through implementation, which now gives us more of a playing field with other states. So now we can talk with other states and see when they have a title and it transfers through their state to our state. So it's really been a game changer. That was a federal system that started back in the 90s, and it was up until Vermont was one of the last ones to join. I believe Hawaii is the last holdout. I've offered to go to Hawaii and try to bring them into the fold, but they haven't authorized that yet. So that's a little bit of my background. But before all of that, I started it in the business industry as an electrician. So went through, got my journeyman's, and so that's where I bring some of that business and having the consumers or clients. And sort of bringing that sort of ideology, went through a real adjacent with the recession to law enforcement, and it's been a wild journey ever since. So it's kind of unique to go back to delve into some of those roots with electrical work. So the Business Services Unit, it's relatively new, July of 2024. It was envisioned to support dealerships and maybe eventually inspection stations and education. Basically, every entity in DMV that might work with businesses, it was really how can we levy the relationships that we've built through many, many years? How can we partner with these entities? And how can we provide them the services in maybe the business timeline versus the DMV timeline? So as we move forward with implementations with our DMV modernization, this was one of the next evolution as we're currently in the license phase to sort of how can we help our dealers. So again, that was sort of the premise. The one-stop shop is what I'm really excited to talk to you about is if any of you have contacted DMV, we had an 828-2000. That was our main information line. And what we've heard historically is sometimes you would get bounced around the lovely big machine that is DMV. And sometimes they would finally get bounced to the investigator or the commissioner's office or whatever source, and they might not be too happy at that point. So what I really tried to levy in creating this new Business Services Unit is dealerships are calling to get their questions answered, fees, what they need to do for their customer. So I created a one-stop shop where we have a dedicated number that goes to the operations side or dealer processing unit, where they're going to get a hold of a live person that's actually the person rating that paperwork and actually the person that can either get them to the investigator or answer their question. And that has been phenomenal. And just since July 24, complaints, dealers are telling me they love it, and it's working. So that's one of the major accomplishments in a short time that I've been able to do. So the individual mission with the dealer services program. So the business service unit, we started out, we're in the phase with dealers and with licensing. So that's where the focus of the business services unit has been initially. And that has created a operational team. So all the dealer transactions are going to a dedicated group to process. That has the oversight of a law enforcement officer, me at the top, with also field inspectors who are non-sworn investigators that'll actually go to these businesses and they'll do regulatory audits, they'll do training, outreach, and a myriad of other functions. So again, we tried to reduce duplication of efforts and again, allowing our dealership staff a real live person who they can reach out to when they're having troubles with a title or whatever the situation may be, instead of getting passed around. All right. So again, as I alluded to, I was added as the section chief. We're very much still in the implementation process. The dealer processing unit started briefly before I became the section chief in July. And that really took all of people from different various operations units that had dealer paperwork experience and put them in a team of a supervisor and 7. That's what we have currently that do all of the dealer transactions primarily. We still allow them to go to branch offices with a number of transactions. And certainly sometimes when we have volume spikes, we need some help with some of our mail processing staff to keep up with that demand. Future expansions, again, incorporate these sort of successes that we've been able to do in the business services unit to maybe other units like the inspection program, education program, and really make this one-stop shop available in other units within DMV. All right, so again, when you merge, this has been a bridge. Enforcement and safety, we all are in the same house, but what we noticed, as I alluded to in the beginning, was there were some silos. There were some information delays. Stuff might be a referral. A customer might call wondering about paperwork, not knowing where it was in that huge chain of DMV. So creating this seamless sort of unit has aided in a lot of that. Again, as I said, we do all of the applications to one location. We still allow runners, but it's about re-engaging that dealer population, which through COVID and through other scenarios, we've seemed to not have been linked with as much in the past. So really, it's been great. I've started sort of on what I call a audit initiative of 2025 to really reconnect with all our dealers and create new portals and new ways for them to reach out to DMV with their issues. Field inspectors, primarily at the criminal investigation unit, we had the inspection program, the dealers program, and field inspectors were multitasks. So they would do some inspection stuff, some dealer stuff. When we reorganized this, we said we want 3 dealer field inspectors statewide. So that was huge to be able to prioritize the dealer transactions, to be able to get field inspectors to these businesses and to re-engage. And that's been hugely successful. I actually just onboarded recently that 3rd. So we got a new position that we were able to navigate for a 3rd person. And it's been great to dealers have been asking for this. They've been wanting to have that point of contact, which historically it's been there, but it hasn't been with other, shortages, hasn't been a priority. So we look to change that. Outreach, enhanced audits, training. Really, it's about bringing everything that we've done historically full circle and to re-engage and to bring technology into this. So creating new solutions.
Do they work geographically, like in a particular area, or do you do it by particular type of dealer, or what?
Field inspectors?
Those people that you're saying they're primarily focused on dealership.
Yeah, so we have the dealer processing that's doing the bulk of the paperwork, the operations side. And then the field inspectors, we just recently redid our map, which I'll show you in a future slide. So to break up the state into 3 sort of quadrants based on where they are throughout the state. We try to keep it where they can reach these places within about an hour. So yes, they do serve a vast group of dealers. because there's only 3 of them for the whole state.
So is that like an audit? They check the paperwork, see it was done properly, or what are they looking for in these field inspectors?
So the field inspectors do a whole thing. So when we have a new business that's taking over, they'll do setups, closeouts of those businesses, transfers. As you can imagine, when you have a new car dealer with a franchise, there's lawyers involved. There's a lot of staffing that needs to transfer over. They'll handle that, but they're also doing investigations. So if somebody complains about buying a car, that some things weren't disclosed during that sale, that would then come to the field inspector. And again, if it goes up from there, we might get the criminal investigation or myself as a law enforcement officer to do those criminal investigations that rise to that level. But a lot of it's regulatory
So,
function.
I mean, 3 throughout the state doesn't obviously seem that many. Is there like a backup or like, what's your, if I file a complaint, when do you get into it?
So, it's handled by, obviously, some of our complaints are managed even at the dealer processing unit.
Yeah,
There's now with technology, as far as billing and transactions, all of the staff, the 8 or so with a supervisor, if paperwork comes in and there's minor corrections that need to be made, nothing that's criminal or nefarious, those folks will usually work through that with the dealers. And they're working with maybe a point of contact, like the person that's the finance director or submitting the money. So that's a huge evolution with our modernization, is now we're able to have dealers direct pay instead of dealing with checks. So that's been huge. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So we can navigate if there's shortages and we're not mailing all that stuff back and forth like we did for many, many years. So again, that direct number, we created a direct number, 1443, that gets you one of those people within the unit. We also have recently shifted. We used to have a dealer's clerk number that was part of our enforcement and safety unit. So that number has also been down, where I'm cross-training a couple of those folks to handle the more complex issues as far as licensing, renewals. Again, many of the other things that the field inspectors will get involved in. Could be a tax issue, several different investigation types, which I'll talk about. Again, billing, tax, plate transfer, fee calculation, all the things that go into when you buy a car, and making sure that the state gets all of the tax revenue and gets those figures correct is something that the dealers do pretty well, but sometimes we have to go in and correct those things. And now it's much more easier than it ever was with our new system. We were DOS based for many, many years in the old legacy system. So really to be able to have queues and be able to interact has been a game changer for DMV in so many areas. Again, we're able to isolate those transactions. We're able to build triggers for things to look for fraud or for even issues that then will go generally in a progressive manner. We'll go educate the dealer, we'll train them, and it'll go up from there. So to answer again your question with field inspectors, they are able to issue tickets, administrative penalties regarding violations of the dealer sort of rules and regulations that are through the DMV in Title 23.
those are just typically monetary, not like shut down or.
They have a progression as well. It's generally their authorities derived through our commissioner. They're agents of the commissioner. And again, I won't say that it couldn't go straight to 11 per se if there's something really serious. We've had embezzlements from employees. We've had dealerships that have gotten very underwater where they're not paying DMV, or they're stealing money from other places instead of that's harmful to the consumer, because if I bought a car from a dealer and they didn't pay the fees to DMV, as they said, I paid them probably a documentation fee. I paid them several $100s to do that service for me. And then come to find out they never did it. That could have dire effects where then that person's now doesn't have a registration that's processed through DMV, and they could be pulled over and put under suspension. So it does have some pretty serious consequences when the dealers don't get it paid. So the supervisor, of that dealer processing team, there's constantly a workload and a backlog. You're taking approximately 567 dealers statewide licenses, and all that work's going to a team of 8 to process. we generally have a backlog, and that probably won't ever happen. But the good news is since we created this business service unit, put them all in one location, we were at a 2 to 4 week processing time. We're down to 0 to 5 at the max of a backlog. So that's huge. Some of the statutes historically were a dealer had 15 days to turn stuff into us. If they're turning stuff into us like they are now, we're able to turn that around pretty quickly. It's about 1,000 pieces of mail that we might be carrying at every given time. But certainly if we have things like flooding that have happened in Vermont or other serious issues, we'll pull in the staff and we'll get through that. And again, as you know, historically, we've made extensions and areas if we weren't able to keep up with demand, but we are.
You get 1,000 pieces of mail a day?
It could be, we generally have 1,000 pieces of mail of a backlog. It varies. So a lot of times on a Monday morning, right? You have the sales from the weekend. You might get mail delays. That stuff is still being delivered to us through the mail primarily. So it can be anywhere from 100 to 500, 600 some high days that we're getting. So not necessarily 1,000 a day, but that's generally if we're working on the current stuff that we get in and maybe a day or two backlog, it's usually not anywhere too far over 1,000 pieces of mail. So he also completes audits. So one of the cool things with the system is, as I said, they can now sign up with a My DMV account, and that dealer is now has an account with DMV. They can see all of their dealer plates. They can see all the stuff that they have in inventory. And as they're selling trans vehicles and submitting that paperwork, they can kind of see where stuff is at. They can see when we're pulling out the right amount of fees. And if there's any issues, we have to constantly every month be doing audits on that to make sure, one, we get it right and they get it right, and that the state gets the proper fees collected. So as you can imagine, in a DOS-based system, we didn't have any of those features. And now there's a running tab, running log, there's audits, there's data points that we just didn't have prior. So it's great to have all those bells and whistles. So what I did was we generally had in enforcement and safety, we had a few clerks that would handle the dealer related matters. So you had one point of contact for all the dealerships. I've now split that into 2, but they're also embedded with that team of processing folks. So they have a little bit extra training to be able to handle the dealer questions and needs. As we're going through modernization and navigation of different units within DMV, we're also planned by later on this year to have our unit dedicated in one separate space with potentially a portal or an open window where dealers could actually go right here to Montpelier if they had something serious that we needed to address. So that's in the works. The accounts and questions, the dealer clerk will handle those. They'll also help with our management internally on if that dealer calls with a complaint or a consumer calls with a complaint. Hey, this isn't paperwork. This needs to go to a field inspector. They'll make those referrals and get that out to the right folks. As you can imagine, being the section chief, some of those will go to me and I'll direct as needed, or I'll get involved personally. I'm very much so boots on the ground with my history with going out with these folks, training them as we build this. I've built relationships with dealerships throughout my tenure at DMV, and I just want to continually expand upon that and train the folks that are working in that unit to also do the same. It's not adversarial. We're partners. They're doing a huge service, and we're trying to meet their needs in a system that's much more fast paced, where banking and all these other things fuse together in the car buying process. So there's that dealer clerk number. They review plates. A lot of it is plates, right? When you have a new dealership, they have a specialized plates. Those need to be ordered. So there's a little bit of you need to be prepared when these businesses come in or they take over. And we have setups all ready to go. So we're able to respond within sometimes 24 or 48 hours if we're not made aware ahead of the time, which that generally does happen. The stockroom in our new system, we now have it where the stockroom can actually send those dealers extra forms, extra plates, And they can request all that through our online portal system, which has made it a lot easier for tracking and for navigating some of this. So this is the latest map. The exciting part with this map, this is a static map. We created sort of a degree of shading within it. Here's the 3 field inspectors, myself, our contact numbers. This is going to be on our DMV website. It's that brand new. And I'm going to take this map and make a virtual version of it where hopefully you'll be able to highlight the individual towns and pull up individual dealers and maybe see, their hours of operation, who their inspector is. And that'll be a huge service for consumers when they're just trying to get to the right person of a complaint, or maybe they just want more information about a dealership. So that is in the works right now. Being part of Agency of Transportation, there's a lot of people that make maps and so levying our internal resources, it was a dream. And they are making it a reality, which is kind of cool.
Is there a database for the public to see complaints that have been validified or, verified?
Not currently. Obviously we receive them from multiple sources. So we don't necessarily track or have this dealer has so many violations. We do keep, if something's gone to a violation, those are on their internal file, which will keep track of that. Generally though, just like your traffic tickets, they fall off after a certain time period. But no, we don't have ratings I know in the previous presentation with different scores for drivers. So
Yeah, I mean, just for the public to say, oh my God, this might be a little shady over here, sort of to direct the public. But that's,
much like our inspection program, which I know you heard a little bit about, they're required to have signage and it's required so consumers have the choice, right? They're not locked in to a certain dealer. They have options. So just like in our inspection program, we don't want to force them to have to go get their car repaired if they're not happy with the service. Same with dealerships. Again, if you're dealing with manufacturers or a specific brand, you might have limited options here in Vermont or have to go out of state. But generally, we don't say, here's good dealers or here's, not
good or bad. This is X, Y, and Z. This is what they got fined for.
Yeah.
Just have a big database, but I just throw that out there.
Cool. So again, the 3 inspectors, I know I alluded to this a little bit before, setups, closeouts, tax-related investigations, audits of sales, enforcement of regulatory requirements. Those are those administrative penalties. They have to have certain building spaces, hours of operation. They can't be doing false advertisements. Some of the stuff that we do counters over to consumer protection. So we work hand in hand with them. To mediate, sometimes a consumer might make a complaint to the CAP program, and we'll get involved in certain aspects of those disputes. And sometimes it's just letting those cool heads prevail and being that mediator that says, okay, you had a bad experience. How can we make it so every party is somewhat made whole? So the referral of the criminal action, as you said, this is I come from enforcement and safety. We have the criminal investigation unit. So where it looks like there's 3 statewide, we have those relationships. They're friends. We're all one big group, where if a case is serious, I can levy some of our detectives. I can work that case myself and we can get more resources when needed. Luckily, we don't have large case dealer fraud issues. I'll knock on wood a little bit, but for the most part, we're able to manage that with the limited staffing that we have now. Always could use more analysts and more things. I'm sure you've heard that a few times on their presentations, but we're able to make do with what we have. So let's talk numbers a little bit. So 567 different dealers with different licenses: new car dealer, used car dealer, motorcycle, ATV, snowboat, finance, auction, any combination thereof. Some dealers have multiple licenses under them and need multiple audits annually to be able to review the sales that they make. Having that new system makes it a lot easier for us to do that. Every month we need to audit the dealer bills. A single dealer may submit 50 transactions a month, ranging from $1,500 to $2,500 in fees owed. So just January 25, one dealer, one of those dealers sent in $202,000 in tax and fees. Another that same month did 238,000. So our processing unit on average, one person may collect $30,000 to $40,000 in revenue a day. And the dealer processing unit has that relationship with finance where we're taking in, anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 a day in all these various transactions.
How are those transactions made? Through a portal?
So currently, all those transactions are mailed in. So they get received in packages.
US mail.
The US mail. Again, I have ideas with, electronic submission and those are hurdles that need to get accomplished. But certainly when you buy a car now, they're sending that transaction electronically to the lender and all over the place. We still receive it in large batches in the mail, usually daily from different dealers with maybe 10 or 20 transactions bundled in. And all of these units go to that well and they'll pull out and they'll process these transactions. The benefit is now we're able to make sure those fees are correct, where if you can imagine in the past, if they sent in a check for 10 transactions and they were short $50, we're then mailing again, hey, you owe us this extra amount that's costing the state. So now the ability to pull that money out and then have that audit function has saved a ton of money. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So, but I mean, if you get some checks from a dealer, the system must already have, this is the car that was bought and registered and all that. And you just sort of, here's now the fees paid.
Right. So we're dealing just with the dealer transactions. So a lot of times they're the ones paying on behalf of the customer. So the checks might be in the dealership's name, which allows us the ability, we do occasionally might get a customer that's paying separately their taxes and fees, but that's not the normal way of going about it. So when we receive that in, we now have the flexibility to be able to say, okay, you were a little short. We took this out. Here's why. And we can send that messaging right to the dealer person instead of that back and forth, where then when we were mailing a whole transaction, let's say we denied this, we're mailing a title that might get lost in the mail. But then as you can imagine, the ripple effects of trying to recreate that title, recreate that transaction, we're in a much better place. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. So this is just the road ahead a little bit of where we've come from with some of the statutes through 2024. So if you aren't aware, we got rid of that 15-year title rule. That created a lot of good things, but obviously there is a period of time where we're transitioning, where we have, Vermonters that don't have a title or bought something on a bill of sale. So we've been working through those issues, and that directly comes to this new business services unit and the dealers program, for sure. This was also, as I mentioned in the opening, the National Vehicle Title Information System. Going to that, we now have the ability to run all these vehicles before we process them to see if there's issues or errors in other states. We didn't have that eyesight before, which, as you could imagine, we were preyed on for fraud because we had a 15-year title rule where you could just transfer something with a bill of sale on a napkin or a piece of paper, and we would accept that as the proof or the chain of ownership. Now, having everything get a title, we're consistent with other states, and we can see if you had a vehicle titled in Maryland and you present me a New York title, I can now say, hey, that's not the last title that was issued for this vehicle. So it gives us eyes to run things through a stolen database as well to see if we have thefts within that and be able to manage some of those cases that we wouldn't have seen or been made aware of prior. So these were some of the things that we sent out. So dealers obviously had questions. They were concerned about, what if I have stuff within my inventory that I don't have titles to? So we set out sort of hypothetical examples and we worked through that. We're also, again, telling dealers they should be checking their resources like Navitas or Carfax. Those are services they can get signed up for to make sure that they're not selling a consumer a vehicle that has issues. Very much of what they're doing is they're basically taking a vehicle from another auction or another source, and they're then saying, I have the lawful ownership of this and I'm selling it to you, consumer. And we need to make sure those chains of ownerships are consistent, because that's where things get complicated. Also, the branding of vehicles, we were allowing, salvage vehicles to be rebuilt through Vermont. We still allow some of that. So it's just building those bridges with other states to make sure we're consistent. As you can imagine, every jurisdiction does it a little bit differently. We're never going to be all one. But certainly Ninvitas has been a huge asset for us being able to be part of the table, right? And see how other transactions are submitted. So a couple other changes, definition to all surface vehicle. We did have some vehicle surface that had eight tires versus 6. Again, I won't touch on the pass fail criteria on rust on rotors. I know that was done in another presentation. And the big ask for the dealer unit was this used vehicle inspection disclosure, which is due by July of 2025. And basically that was consumer driven, so that if a dealership has done an inspection or a consumer knew when the vehicle was last inspected. What we had in industry is dealers would buy vehicles from auction with good Vermont inspection stickers up on that. And then they would sell that to the consumer saying, well, it's got a good Vermont inspection sticker on it. And then they would say, I'm a dealer, I'm not an inspection mechanic, so I didn't know there were issues with that. And that's been a huge thing that we hoped to curb. And I believe this will help in that matter.
I imagine that's how it ended up in the auction. There's a problem with it, and then,
Well, and they would go for more money too. So people would be bidding on these vehicles because they had that, what we'd call that fresh or that good inspection sticker. So it became an issue where obviously it was raised to certain committees, and this was adopted, or this came out of the last session, where really we wanted the consumer to know. And we wanted the dealer to say, hey, I'm either going to re-inspect that vehicle or I'm going to put my name, my dealership, my business behind this instead of skirting some of those nefarious reasons. So this is the sample form. What I will say about that, it goes into effect in July. We partner with the Vermont Automobile Dealers Association. This goes to them. We came back for comments. We're not always just, sending things out and saying, you got to abide by it. We had a framework that was sent to us from the legislature, and we built all those points, but we also wanted to make sure it was a form that was going to work with those businesses in their complex, situations. Where are they going to be scanning this in? How are they going to do this within the sale of a vehicle to capture this data that is now required? And it's data for us, but it also is a peace of mind for a consumer. It's extra information. When people go to buy a car, sometimes they're just looking at that vehicle, they're smelling that new car smell, and they forget to read the fine print, right, on some of these transactions. So this is a part in that sale where this is going to be disclosed to them to hopefully say, hey, pay attention. Just a little recap of our DMV core system. We started with the vehicle services, a creation of VT trips. We're currently in the driver services project where we're bringing in our licensing. And that's where some of the business service unit was born. And then future, projects will come down the road as we look to make improvements and levying all of that new system that we now have. So just to walk through some of the dealer related enhancements that we have received when we built this with the vendor. So that My DMV portal is kind of where it starts. So entities and even private folks can create a My DMV account where they'll have extra links that they can get to for the services that they're looking for. So we sent out mailers to encourage dealers to sign up for this. We have a vastly different population of dealers. We have the mom and pops. We have the large manufacturer driven dealerships and everything in between. So we still have dealerships that don't want to be tied into this system, that still send us checks, that still will mail transactions or come in person to process. But we're really trying to levy technology and get them into this because it gives them a lot of resources. They can actually look at what their current balances are. Here's some of them, some of the features that they have. So they can make payments, they can view their dealer sales, they can order more supplies and forms. They can go through that renewal process where they can send in the application and then our field inspector will come out when necessary. Sometimes they can give us their numbers for sales of vehicles that they do in a given year. And then we will we'll compare those when we do an audit. If they lose a dealer plate, they can request replacements. Generally, we'll go out and verify why did you lose that plate, because dealer plates are very valuable because they're not tied to a single vehicle. They can be used for a lot of nefarious purposes if they're not managed. We can send letters and messages now. So if somebody owes us some money, we can send them a letter saying, hey, you owe us these additional fees, or we'll remove it from your account. We also can send vital information. Here's this new form that's coming out in July 2025. You should pay attention. You're required to submit this. So all of these features are features that we didn't have prior to this new implementation and system. Again, make a payment. They can now make payments. They can set up ACH or accounts with us to be able to direct deposit some of those. And again, viewing their dealer sales. This has allowed us to create reports as well within this system so we can track vital information, stats. We can see what dealers have made. A dealer, to be classified as a dealer, they're required to make 12 sales within a year or 24 within a 2-year period. So we, believe it or not, we do have some licensed dealers that fail to meet that, which we have to go in and bring them either, hey, you need to make more sales this next year or else you'll lose that licensure. We certainly have others that make a lot of sales and they want to keep track of those. Supply and ordering, that was huge. A lot of times the folks within our processing or operations unit would have to receive those requests by mail, put them together, go get those plates from the stockroom, and then mail them out from our enforcement and safety. Now, all of that work can be done through the supply ordering right online. And we have barriers in there, so they can't be manipulated. They can't order, 1,000 plates because we want to limit how many plates that they have and that they're being issued sequentially and to the right folks. So we don't have temporary plates or we don't have dealer plates that are out there not being tracked. The dealer can report lost or stolen. They're required to report lost or stolen plates to the local jurisdiction where they were lost, but they also report that to DMV as well. And occasionally we'll do investigations. It used to be people would put them on a magnet, right? We got rid of that a long time ago. Really, we require the dealers to maintain their dealer plates because they're of huge importance. Some dealerships will have very sophisticated systems where if you take a dealer plate on a test drive, they're taking a picture of you, they're putting it in their system, they pay a lot of money for that. Or we require that they have some sort of tracking system so that they know where their plates are. They'll use air tags. It varies from dealership to dealership, but generally we put the emphasis of we don't want these plates being used for crimes in another state or being lost where they're not reported to us. And, it'd be very bad if somebody picked up one of these dealer plates. They could do a lot of harm with that because they're not tied to an individual vehicle.
So if you run a dealer plate, you don't know what vehicle it should be on, that's what you're saying. But it will say it's a dealer plate issued to so-and-so or.
And dealerships are required to give us that. Law enforcement, local law enforcement at the local level or DMV, we go in there, we want to know where dealer A123 is. They're supposed to in real time be able to bring that up and show us. It could be somebody's investigating a crime where that might be on a loaner vehicle. We also need to know that was issued to Mrs. Jones, right? And then when Mrs. Jones' son takes that vehicle and isn't authorized to it and commits a crime or has doesn't have a license or gets a DUI, we need to be able to track all that back. And that's where it's different from normal registrations, is because it's not tied to an individual vehicle. So we need to protect that a little bit. Liens are a huge emerging, so they can run liens through Vermont, but every state manages liens differently. And so that's a huge issue as we look for expanding upon Navitas and that nationwide title system, looking at how we capture lien information, so we can run certain searches, because somebody has a lien on a vehicle in Oklahoma, they bring it to Vermont, they submit a fraudulent title, they remove that lien. We're not necessarily talking state to state yet on being able to figure that out in a timely manner before it's transferred to somebody that doesn't have ownership of that vehicle. All right, partnership and outreach. So we work with the Consumer Assistance Program, referrals back and forth, Automobile Dealers Association, the Criminal Investigation Unit, Enforcement and Safety, that was here presenting on the inspection program and everything they do. Protection of vulnerable adults, marginalized folks in the car buying process. One of the things I did towards the tail end of last year was we actually went, we were asked by the Afghan Alliance to help folks that had language barriers buy a car in Vermont, and culturally how they buy cars or how they have credit. They had some challenges with even doing our road test and just all the various things that when you go to buy a car, we take for granted. So it was an interesting experience. For obviously I'm a talker, so every sentence would take several minutes to get transferred into their native language in a couple of dialects so that we could communicate back and forth. But the positives are we developed some strategies on how we could help them with interpreters and how we could get them through the system and make them feel empowered to be pre-vetted. So when they go to buy a car, they already have that financing piece for a certain amount for a vehicle to make it easier for them to get a loan when they might not have the same credit that you or I. So again, just a recent example of some of the outreach that we've done. So we carry on average a 0 to 3 day backlog with provisions to tackle surges, seasonal events. Before, flood and weather, staffing shortages, we were at 2 to 4 weeks or more. I can remember even prior to the system, there were some windows where it was even greater than that, and trying to keep up with demand. Certainly COVID was a challenge for us to figure out how to find solutions through that time. Again, having the specialized unit that knows the dealer transactions, rates them every day. We have better quality control on being able to facilitate getting those through the necessary checks to get them out the door to the consumer. The one-stop shop has been the greatest achievement, because now folks, whatever their complaints are, they're navigated to this one business services unit for us to help them with whatever issue they're facing. Again, I mentioned we are currently in sort of a reprioritization period where we're doing this initiative of auditing, reconnecting with all of our dealers throughout the state to say, hey, here's your new inspector, here's the map, here's how you reach out to us so we can, again, prioritize them and the services that they provide Vermonters. Another initiative, I know it was touched on with the other group, fraudulent document training. That initiative we always train new staff when they come to Vermont, but these trends are evolving. There's constantly new fraud schemes that occur. So we need to make sure all of our staff that are the front lines, kind of like our patrol officers that are reviewing this paperwork, to be trained on how to detect fraudulent schemes, fraudulent paperwork, and be able to refer that to enforcement and safety for us to investigate. So challenges ahead. Some of those were alluded: technology, AI. We have different models. We've had direct to consumer sales. Brick and mortar sales have been the traditional way to buy a car. We also have the emerging online sales, which isn't new, but certainly has created the internet technology a lot more challenges in buying cars. Self-driving vehicles, I know that they talked about that earlier.
How much different is it for your staff, your people for processing the paperwork when they buy these online sales? They buy it from somebody in a different, other states, other pieces. I mean,
It's challenging because that's more of a consumer protection. Where did the sale occur is establishing that for if we were to have a criminal case, if it's IP addresses, how that vehicle was bought. Are those businesses Vermont businesses, or is it a wire transfer where they paid from a certain location? So all that gets complicated on where, I don't want to use the term jurisdiction is, but where those cases are navigated and who has the authority to investigate and enforce those laws. So it becomes challenging. But internally, if we're developing one of those cases or a complaint comes to us with somebody that bought a vehicle, we will, in a sense, DMV is the gatekeeper to say, hey, this might not be within our realm, but we're going to get you over to consumer protection where they have investigators. There's also different portals for, as I said, the consumer protection complaints that happen between dealers and consumers. A lot of that is mediated, and some of those decisions are made to help make the consumer whole, or the dealers will write a letter, the consumer will write a letter, and sometimes we'll get involved in helping to mediate those situations. Answer the question. Falsification of Vermont residency is a huge thing. Previously, when we were 15-year title, you did not have to be a Vermont resident to register a vehicle here. Now we require you have ties to Vermont. So that has helped curb some of that. But what we've seen is a trend of people establishing false residencies, a vacant lot, a rental property, a virtual office is their residency, and that's not really ties to Vermont. So as much as we try to stay ahead of the trends, that is what we're seeing is a population of folks that are trying to manipulate Vermont to be able to continue to process transactions. And are they even dealerships? Are they middlemen? Are they straw buyers? So those are the constant things that in the fraud realm that we're combating every day. False advertisements, that's more of the consumer protection, but we do have, you probably received those mailers, where it says you've won the grand prize, they give you a coin, you go to the dealership. So some of those are things that mainly the consumer protection will go after, but we've aided in some of those investigations because are they false advertising? Are they truly the terms? Is it one vehicle that's got that special deal of $299 a month? So we try to curb some of those practices as well. And because we're agents of the commissioner and we have the regulatory authority of dealerships, we're sometimes the source to go and investigate, interview, and stop some of these advertisement issues. Again, touch on a couple relevant fraudulent trends. Spoofing of the dealership website. This is a recent thing that happened. We're seeing not necessarily entities of the United States, but bad actors abroad that will create a mirror image of, let's say, a dealership here in Vermont's website with their own numbers, their own representatives, and they're trying to get somebody to buy a car that will never come to them. And so they're trying to get them to transfer money and send something to them. So that's one thing that, it's a trend that's happened from our other state partners, but it is something that is here in Vermont and we're seeing in our small state. Fraudulent use of the manufacturer's certificate of origin or fake titles. So the MCO is the pre-title. So when the dealership receives that vehicle off from the manufacturer, they get the certificate of origin. We've seen some manipulation where it hasn't entered a DMV system yet where we would create a title, the first title for that vehicle. We've seen people make fake MCOs and try to submit those as ownership to get control of a vehicle. It could be a clone vehicle, it could be a stolen vehicle. And again, what they're trying to do could be as low as they're just trying to get that vehicle to convert something that's stolen to look like it's not stolen. Maybe they're trying to export that vehicle because they can get more money for it in another country. One example is a BMW here. A high-end one might be $100,000. In China or other markets, those would go for $300,000 or $400,000. So there is profit, and when there's profit, you tend to see people try to exploit the DMV in those situations. Identity theft of license, that's a huge issue where people will, through the dark web, get your identity and they'll go and try and buy a car with it. So we're constantly trying to make sure we're the gatekeepers of that personal identifiable information, the PII. So we're very careful on making sure that it's the right person, and our dealers are trained in that as well, to try and prevent some of these folks from trying to buy cars that it's not the person. Skips in the chain of ownership. That's somebody skipping themselves out of that for liability. Maybe it's a salvage vehicle and they say, I didn't buy it. The dealership sold it to this person, but they're really the seller. So we're constantly chasing illegal dealers, and those sort of situations as well. Fraudulent submissions, people just put in the wrong amount that they paid for the vehicle to try and lessen the tax load. I can list 100 different scenarios. Mileage and odometer rollbacks are something that are coming back and are a lot worse now because of technology. It used to be with your analog, it was easier, right? With an analog. Now with the digital, we're like, this is harder. Vehicles are mini computers. So they now have fancy, spin back devices that they'll actually do because there's profit, right? They can take a car with 300,000 miles, spin it back to 50 and sell it to you for a lot more than you would have paid for that other vehicle. So that is something that is a trend that is coming back. And those are challenging because there's usually an organized crime group that's doing that. There's usually sophistication involved in catching that and tracking those. But the good news is we are tapped in with our inspection program. I don't know if they mentioned where we're actually reading that electronic VIN. Because we used to have inspection stations that would plug in a good vehicle that would pass emissions. So we have some of those advancements within our system to catch this. With that national title information system and looking at, hey, if you had that title in Oklahoma and it had 100,000 miles and now it's in Vermont with 75, that's now a flag that we can then start an investigation and look at. So technology is a great thing, but it also is constantly our adversary at times. Brand removals, lien removals, we've seen an increase in that, where they'll take a vehicle and they'll transfer the lien or they'll just remove the lien altogether. There's a real live bank or financing company that has a loan on that vehicle that's now just been removed. So they're the owner of that vehicle, and now somebody is saying, well, I own this vehicle, I want a title in my name. And that can be challenging to try and work through those. Cloning vehicles, taking a stolen vehicle, taking a vehicle from a junkyard, taking all the VINs off of that, putting it on the stolen vehicle, registering it as if it's that other vehicle that was junked or destroyed. We see that. You'll see now, because we're tapped into that system, there might be two histories. So we might have a registration for a vehicle in Vermont. The other one might be in Hawaii. I would love if they sent me to Hawaii to go check to see if that was the fake vehicle, but we're able to combat some of that because we're tied into that national system. So that's just a real quick on fraudulent trends. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer this. So future electronic submissions of dealers, being able to have them submit through a portal system to DMV would aid in some of that mailing. Workflow procedures, we're doing that now to sort of align all the different case types that we do to make sure that we can follow the same procedures. We have consistency. Electronic titling, just like the industries with the commercial vehicles that you saw this morning, there's lots of advancements where people are looking to go to an electronic system, electronic titling, no more paper titles. What would that save jurisdictions on the cost? Still an emerging technology. Other states have done pilot programs on that. As an investigator, that's put titles underneath microscopes and look for microprint and sort of those sort of security features. Not 100% sold yet, but certainly it seems to be the trend to get rid of paper and to go to more of an electronic solution. So we'll see. Nationwide lien database, that's something that has been identified on the national committee to look into, making sure, just like with titles, it'd be really nice to share all that lien information so we don't have somebody losing ownership of a vehicle. And again, we're constantly improving the My DMV system and the portal that we already have in place. And I went 5 minutes to spare. All right, questions?
You're fast.
Before lunch, I knew I had to get here.
It certainly goes to show how many different things we're involved in. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's the purview of our committee is, by some people, be limited to potholes and whatnot. But if we want to make any DMV changes, it's amazing how far things go.
Well, it's still the number one mode of transportation, right? So we use it every day. The criminals use it to do their nefarious acts. So it's still very much embedded in culture. So it certainly has a very expansive purview that you want.
and it's a lot of money.
And there's a lot of money to be made.
Tax,
Yeah. You know, vehicles are a lot more expensive than they once were. They seem to keep going up. And as we talk about emerging technologies with self-driving cars, I know there's been some pilot initiatives on that. You know, how are those going to be separated from the normal person driving down the road? Or is there going to be a little robot that, you know, flags if there's an issue? So it'll be interesting to see where technology takes us. So.
Anybody else have any other questions? Jeremy, I appreciate you coming in this morning.
Thank you.
And appreciate the presentation of all the DMV pieces.